It has become somewhat common in recent times to blame religion for so much of the evil that we find in the world. And this is not without some reason, of course. I mean, if you want to create a list of all of the terrible things that have been carried out in the name of religion, including Christianity, it's not hard. Think of all the jihads, the crusades, the genocides that have been carried out in the name of faith. And consider, of course, the atrocities that have been committed over religious differences in places like Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, Israel, and the Palestinian territories, to name just a few. Remember in our own country the story of the doctrine of discovery, a Christian teaching endorsed by all major Christian faiths, which justified stripping the lands from the indigenous people here because they were considered to be quote unquote savages. Think of the residential school system, which was a matter of national government policy, but that churches bought into willingly because they saw in it a chance to build up their own institutions. Religion, of course, is not the only cause of such devastation. You may also say much the same things about nationalism and tribalism and racism, but still, no one should underestimate the evil that has been carried out in this world by faith and in the name of faith. More than that, though, how many individual lives have been devastated by their encounters with religion? Abused people have often seen their abusers empowered and protected by religious institutions. On this Christian Family Sunday, let's admit that, yes, religion has sometimes had devastating effects on families. Parents have been persuaded by religious teachers that if their children don't fit certain expectations, that they should reject them, maybe even turn them out. Such teachings have led to horrible outcomes, including suicide and long-term addiction. How many individuals also struggle with the long-term effects of the trauma they experienced through a strict religious upbringing. For some, it is a pain they carry every day, and that most cannot overcome without some extended therapy. Religion of all sorts has absolutely negatively affected many people's lives. So, yeah, the downside of religion is undeniable. I don't think we should try to deny it. And so you might well ask me, well, why then am I committed to the kind of work that I do? Why not just give up on religion altogether? I'll tell you why. It's because of the altar to an unknown God. When the Apostle Paul was in Athens, he discovered a city that was full of religion and full of gods. He would have found some of the most famous and celebrated temples in the history of the world. The Parthenon, the celebrated temple of the Olympian Zeus, the massive temple of Hephaestus, to name just a few. And these temples represented some of the most powerful religious institutions that had ever existed. In the names of these gods, and gods like them, the legions of Rome had marched to conquer the whole world. In the names of such God, great evil had been done, and yes, no doubt some good as well. But whether good or ill, people believed in these gods and in their stories because they had always been taught to. And so as Paul looked around at these altars, yes, he concluded that the Athenians were indeed a very religious people. And he maybe wondered, given all of the violence, given all of the evil committed in the name of these well-established gods, whether the world would have been a better place if they had never existed. as a member of a religious community, a minority who had suffered at the hands of the worshipers of these gods. Maybe you can hardly blame him for thinking that. And so why is it that when Paul spoke before the Areopagus, an assembly of leading Athenian people who were judging him, why did he speak so positively about the spiritual and religious lives of the Athenians? Athenians, he said, I see how extremely spiritual you are in every way. Why didn't he just reject their spiritual impulses as dangerous and deadly? Well, I believe he didn't because of the altar to an unknown God. As he had wandered the city, he had seen an altar dedicated to an unnamed God. Now, no one has ever actually found this altar dedicated to an unknown God in Athens among all the archaeological digs, but there's no reason to doubt that there would have been at least one there, for they were not uncommon in the ancient Mediterranean world. One has been found in excellent condition in the city of Rome. And you got to wonder, why did such altars exist in a place like Athens or Rome? I mean, they had plenty of gods, 12 major Olympian gods, tons of minor gods and demigods. You kind of think they'd have their bases covered. And yet these strange altars kept being built, no doubt at great personal cost, great personal sacrifice to the builder. Why? Why were people doing this? Well, the answer is simple. Such altars were erected because people had experiences of the divine that did not fit within the boundaries of the huge varieties of religions that they saw around them. So these people, I guess, were going along with their everyday lives, and they suddenly found themselves experiencing transcendence that they could not explain. Might have been something as simple as a moment of pure joy, or maybe terror. Maybe they felt helped in some way that they couldn't quite explain. Maybe they couldn't even put a finger on what they had experienced. They just knew. They had been in the presence of the divine. But what they had experienced did not fit with what they had been taught about the traditional gods all their lives. So they had to create some way to acknowledge what they had experienced outside of the established religion of their society. That must have been what had happened. But do you realize what that means? See, we often work under the assumption that spiritual experiences are created by religious practice and belief. We assume that if you pray in the right ways, if you enact the correct rituals, you will experience God. We think that if you learn all of the proper doctrines about God according to your religion, you will come to know God. But the existence of the altar to an unknown God proves this is not true. Because pretty clearly, if you had taken away all of the altars of all the Olympian gods in Athens, in Greece, if you were to take away all of the priests and the philosophers who taught their religious and spiritual ideas, you would not have eradicated belief in the divine. People would have still been experiencing such things, and in response they would have felt compelled to set up altars to the unknown that they had experienced. See, the truth of the matter is that there's something in our humanity, built into the very structure of our minds, that disposes us to have spiritual experiences. I don't know why this is. I mean, my suspicion is that it is something that God has intentionally built into us, but I obviously cannot prove that. But wherever it comes from, it is an undeniable part of who we are as a collective species. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that everyone has spiritual experiences or that they have the same ones. Certainly doesn't mean we all have them to the same degree. But such experiences are and always have been and always will be an ongoing part of human life and experience. So if religion is flawed, even if it has led to evil things in this world, guess what? We cannot respond by giving up on religion entirely. Because guess what? If all of the principled and thoughtful and moral people gave up on religion, would it cease to exist? It would not. I mean, you could tear down all the churches and the temples and the mosques. You could destroy all the institutions that support them. And what would happen? Would it bring about the end of religion and all the evil it can potentially do? No, because people would continue to experience the divine and therefore continue to be compelled to build in their own ways altars to the unknown God that they had experienced. And that would not be the only result, because I could guarantee you that things would quickly turn much worse. Because if all of the principled and ethical believers abandoned religion, what would that leave? It would leave all of the unscrupulous ones. And do not think that they wouldn't be only too happy to co-opt all of the good intentions of the builders of the altars to an unknown God and direct those people into new campaigns of terror and hatred and intolerance. So, if you're going to ask me to defend my choice to continue to participate in the Christian religion, despite knowing the damage that it has done and is capable of doing, this is what my answer would be. I stick around. Not because I've deluded myself into thinking that there's never anything wrong with this religion. I stick around because I will not abandon this tradition to those who would use it in such ways. I stick around so that I can do my best, my humble best, to promote a Christian faith that is open and tolerant and welcoming. I stick around to demonstrate to the world that it is possible to be a Christian and not be hateful. And I'm sorry to be living in a time when many people have concluded that that is impossible, but I will do my best to counter that narrative. And so while I have no way of knowing all that was happening in the mind of Paul as he stood before that meeting of the Areopagus, I like to think he was thinking much along those same lines. And that's why he chose not to condemn the Athenians for the errors he saw in their religious practice. He had respect for the divine experiences that they had had, and he found ways to honor those experiences. And yes, Paul did not hesitate to proclaim his own understanding of the best way to approach the divine. And he had much to share because he had learned wonderful things from his experience of the risen Christ who had revealed God to him. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it is amazing to see how Paul speaks to these people while remaining and maintaining respect for their spiritual experiences. He quotes their own poets and philosophers to them. He recognizes that their impulses towards the divine are good, and he recognizes their desire to set up modes of worship as legitimate. He has respect for people who believe differently, and I think that is something that can take us a long way in this world. It is an attitude that I would bring to every aspect of my religious life and walk. But more than that, even though he doesn't refrain from sharing his own understanding of faith, he is very much interested in finding points of contact with these others rather than points of difference. He focuses, for example, on the common kinship of all humanity. From one ancestor, he made all peoples to inhabit the whole earth, he says. He doesn't insist that God's concern is limited only to God's own people. The God he worshiped acknowledges all nations. He allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live. But most of all, and I find this amazing, Paul humbly acknowledges that all of our knowledge of God, at best, is little more than us fumbling around and maybe finding him. Such humility, I think, will serve us well in all of our dealings with those who believe differently. Religion is not the greatest evil on the face of this earth, but neither is it, in itself, the salvation of humanity. A lot of it is us just fumbling around, trying to do our best to honor what we have experienced of God. It's a response, an imperfect response at best. But religion will not go away if we give up on it. It will only actually become more problematic. My hope, our hope, is found not in religion. It is found in the God for whom we fumble about. And grace and hope is found in the fact that such a God is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. Thank you, God, for this incredible impulse you have built into us, it seems, to find you, to fumble about, to seek you, and to have experiences of you. It is amazing. And we confess that now our religion falls short of being all that it should be. Thank you for your grace that overwhelms us. Amen.